We're going to end this week by talking about muscle soreness. Okay, and just to let you know, the older you get, the more muscle soreness you're likely to experience. It's super awesome. Okay, so really it's one main objective, but we're going to talk about three different types of soreness. Okay, so acute soreness, DOMS, and cramps. So acute soreness, this is what we all experience right after we work out. Okay, so oftentimes maybe a muscle strain, stiffness, you're achy, you're tender, you're sore, like that sort of thing. Just kind of the typical wear and tear that we all experience after a workout. Okay, so this is caused by increased hydrogen ion. Okay, so that might be causing the burning sensation as well as edema. Okay, and remember, edema is where fluid is going from your plasma into the tissues. And so this is what causes muscles to swell. All right, and so this can cause some pain. All right, but the nice thing about acute soreness is it usually resolves within a few hours, maybe a little bit longer, but generally speaking, you know, it's gone relatively quickly. All right. But the older you get, the more you'll experience, right? So I don't know if you've heard the joke or something like that. Like, you know that you're old when you hurt yourself because you went to sleep. All right, it's a thing and it sucks. All right, so then we've got DOMS, or delayed onset of muscle soreness. So this is soreness that occurs a couple of days after exercise. And it can range from just being something that's relatively mild, so mild stiffness, all the way up to severe pain, okay, and ultimately makes it difficult to move. Now, what causes DOMS are not completely understood, but what we do seem to understand is that eccentric contractions cause this to a greater extent than concentric contractions. Okay, and so just to give you an idea, the sorest I have ever been in my entire life, there's actually two of them, two times that really stand out. The first one was when I did the St. George Marathon. It was my first marathon. This is in St. George, Utah. It's a little town about an hour and a half outside of Vegas. And what they do is they take you 26 miles. They bus you up the hill 26 miles outside of town, and you run back down the mountain, essentially, into downtown St. George. It's great. It's beautiful. We've got the Red Rock and stuff. But it's 26 miles, for the most part, of downhill running. I think there's like 3,000 feet that you lose in elevation gain, which is quite a bit. Okay. And so I remember the next day I had to fly across country from LA to Cleveland, and I was dying. My legs were just killing me because they were so sore. The next time was a couple years later. It's actually several years later. I was at Oregon. I was helping out with a study where they were trying to understand DOMS. And so in order to understand them, they needed to induce them. And so they put me on a treadmill that was with a decline of like 10% or something, and they had me run a 10K. Okay, and so they had me run it quick. And so I was running, I don't know what it was, sub 7 minutes, which isn't crazy fast, but for me it was fast. And I did, so I ran my 45 minutes, my 5K in 45 minutes, give or take. And shortly thereafter, I couldn't walk. It was awful. I had this DOMS, these came quick. So this wasn't the typical 1 to 2 days. This was something that struck relatively quickly. Okay, and so what we think's going on, especially with these eccentric contraction, is the high tension is causing muscle damage. Okay, and you're damaging the muscle, you're damaging the membrane, you're damaging the connective tissue. Like, there's just damage going on everywhere. Okay, you're inhibiting cellular respiration. Okay, this affects the Z lines, and I don't think I have a picture here, but you can Google this and you can see how the Z lines don't line up in people that experience DOMS. And so as a result, there's an inflammatory response to try and fix it. All right. But what this does with this inflammation is you activate nerve endings. And when you activate nerve endings, you feel pain. Okay. And so this, along with edema and swelling, it does not make for a very fun day or fun couple of days. This took several days, but in both cases, it took 2 or 3 days for it to completely resolve. It was awful. Okay. And in both cases, it's in my quads that I was feeling it. And the interesting thing is going upstairs was completely fine. Going downstairs or downhill it was like knives were stabbing into my legs because that was when I was using my quads. This is where I was feeling it. All right, so the last thing is muscle cramps. And so the cramps are just involuntary muscle contractions. So this can occur during or after exercise. Okay. And they're involuntary. I want to reiterate that. So I kind of the example I use from a few years ago was when LeBron James was still in the Heat. They were playing the Spurs in the finals. It was really hot, and he had cramps, and he went out, and people were like, oh, Jordan would never have done that, this, that, and the other. And I'm only a little bit of a LeBron fan, but that's just because he's on the Lakers. I didn't like LeBron at all back when he wasn't on the Lakers. But I did feel bad for him because I'm like, if he's truly got muscle cramps, there's nothing he can do about it. They're involuntary. That's why we call them involuntary. You can't control them. Now, there's two reasons why these might happen, or at least two theories that are being looked into. One is what we call the neuromuscular theory, and one is what we call the electrolyte depletion theory. So with the neuromuscular theory, we just know that something's going on between the motor neuron and the muscle cell, right? That's really kind of vague. And so fatigue results in your exciting the muscle spindles. Remember, when we excite muscle spindles, we cause muscle contraction. We inhibit GTOs. And remember, GTOs inhibit muscle contraction. So if we inhibit GTOs, we're inhibiting the thing that inhibits muscle contraction. And so as a result, your motor neurons fire kind of whenever, and this causes involuntary twitches or muscle contractions. It's great fun, and we've all experienced it, right? Like, that's the worst. I'll be sitting on the couch, and all of a sudden my foot cramps up, and you got to do that thing where you push back on your foot to kind of stretch it out. Then we've got the electrolyte depletion theory, and this one is probably more in line with what LeBron was experiencing. These are heat cramps, right? So you generally experience this kind with large muscle groups, and what happens is your muscle locks up. And so the reason that this happens is you're dehydrated. So you've sweat, you've dehydrated, you've lost water, and you're losing water from the interstitial fluid in your plasma. And so this is changing concentrations really of the ions outside of your cell. Okay, and so we have large changes in the concentration of sodium and chloride. And so sodium moves, or fluid moves from the interstitial space to the intravascular space. What's happening is we're trying to replenish what we lose in our bloodstream via sweating from the interstitial fluid. Okay, and so there's a bunch of things that can happen, including not only changes the ion concentration, but we can increase neurotransmitter concentration. And so as a result, it becomes a lot easier to hyper-excite or make a neuron more negative, okay? Because it's going to be difficult for ions to move. It's going to change the ability for ions to move in or out of the cell. And so that's where we're going to end with the soreness.